The organization and the supervisors are responsible for your burnout. They're to blame. You are not to blame. And don't allow them to tell you that it's your fault, that you're quote unquote burned out.
Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of 911 Delta Tethered for Life podcast. As usual, this episode may not be suitable for all listeners due to language and content, so listen with care and stay safe out there. Alright guys, welcome back to part 2 of our episode about the fuck it's with Dr. Meredith Krause. No recap from Casey and I this week because we're just going to dive right in. So grab your headset.
Oh, let's just dive right into burnout. So people say I'm burned out, right? This place has burnt me out. Or you'll be the boss saying, I got an employee who's burnout. And the first thing I try to make people understand is burnout is not a character defect. You don't get burned out because you're a problem or because you're defective or because you're a loser. Burnout is most often an organizational artifact. It happens in organizations where people feel used, abused, with unfair compensation or inadequate compensation, few opportunities for growth and development, and limited supervisory support. So it's kind of like it becomes, this is the organizational grind. You are a number as an employee. Come in, sit down, do your job, shut up. And if we wanted your opinion, we would have issued you one. That is kind of the breeding ground for burnout. And burnout can lead to a very common set of personal experiences, feeling exhausted, depleted, having that problematic case of the fuckets, the unhealthy fuckets. That's one piece. The other piece may be getting kind of a sense of cynical, jaded, negativistic, like Debbie Downer to the max. These folks come into work, they look pissed off, they have nothing positive to say, their performance is subpar because of it. They're done, empty. And then also there's just a sense that this job is offering me absolutely nothing. There's no sense of accomplishment. There's no sense of dedication. Just done. So it's that combination. And that's why it's so easy to mistake for compassion fatigue, because that cynicism, negativism, lack of energy can also manifest in compassion fatigue. But I like to really focus on burnout as kind of a organizational, job-related, almost a predictable outcome in certain settings where you feel unsupported, unimportant, undervalued, misused, and abused. Does that make sense?
It does. It sounds like a very familiar place.
It does. Workplaces will commonly use that phrase, right? We don't want you guys to be burned out, or we want to combat burnout. But they're not talking about what you're talking about. And I think that they would not use that term if employees were like, well, you're the reason for my burnout. Right? They're talking about it like, oh, well, it's basically you've got compassion fatigue and that's why you're burned out. That's how it's always been put to me anyway.
And that's why my first part of any presentation, when I used to do this in police departments or at Joint Terrorism Task Force, the first thing I'd say is the organization and the supervisors are responsible for your burnout. They're to blame. You are not to blame. And don't allow them to tell you that it's your fault that you're quote unquote burned out. This is an organizational outcome, and the organization has to own it and take active steps to prevent it. But in places where people are short staffed, having to work mandatory overtime, they can't go get professional development, they can't take time off, they don't get bonuses for their performance. These are all risk factors for burnout, right? And how often are you guys facing that in your work? This is, from what I understand, it's every day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
And then that message of do more with less, do it with
Right.
public scrutiny and criticism of your work. With people Monday morning quarterbacking the decisions that are made out on the streets or behind the headset. It's just an impossible ask. Maslach Burnout Inventory, the MBI, has actually been around a long time, and it's
Oh.
one of the measures I actually use as part of one of the leadership selection programs that I support for the military, because what we find is that burnout tends to be associated with toxic leadership, and we don't want those people in charge. So we're asking them questions about burnout. There are also a couple different measures of compassion fatigue because it's so widespread, not just in public safety, but also in nursing,
Right.
in mental health professions, any place where you're kind of providing ongoing support to people in need. So absolutely, those measures are out there, and I used to distribute them at the beginning of the trainings I'd give. And one would look at burnout, one would look at compassion fatigue, and I'd have people self-score them so they can understand what actually makes up those two different experiences. So they're out there.
Cool.
But I think the big take-home message when I was doing supervisory training is that supervisors are the single biggest make or breaker when it comes to burnout. If you have a supervisor that genuinely cares about you, knows what's going on in your life, does their level best to protect you from the crap you don't need to hear or know about, tries to get you that professional development, tries to recognize what you're doing right and support you in growing, that is a huge buffer against burnout. So for all of you supervisors out there, if you're feeling burnt out, we've got a problem, because you're not going to have anything left to give to your subordinates, right? And then we kind of have to ask then if this is just a cancer in an organization, and what's going on in the bigger organization that might need to change.
Cool. What are some things that people or their family members can look for as signs of being overstressed or burnt out?
Well, we talked about the I used to's last time, right? Where folks no longer have the energy to do the things they love, and they just kind of go sit in the magic chair at the end of the day. And the magic chair is the recliner or their favorite spot on the couch or their bed. And they don't want to, you ask them what they want for dinner, and they say, I don't care. And you ask them what they want to do for vacation. I don't care. You make the decision. You ask them where they, what they want to do for the weekend or their next time off. I don't care. You make it. Empty, zombie, sitting there with the clicker or their phone, scrolling, mindless, numbed up, empty and vacant. That magic chair kind of retreat is a big one for a lot of people. Irritability tends to be the other one, right? Short fuse, no patience, yelling at the kids, preoccupied, disengaged, just on edge. Sleep disturbance, huge. That is another indicator of kind of a impaired stress response or burnout. And then, of course, alcohol or substance use to extreme or changes in that. And for many of us, alcohol becomes that only way we can relax when we're not at work, or the quickest way to clear our mind, or to help us sleep. Or, and we kind of start thinking, if I just have a glass or two of wine, or if I just have a few beers, or if I just sit on the back porch with some gummies. Most of us can't do that because we have to piss test. But so it's really alcohol that's the issue that I worry about. What do you guys look for in your coworkers as tells that they're burning out?
Well, I don't really have that issue where I am now. I mean, I work in a place that's almost damn near perfect.
So what are you,
So,
the reception? Are you the receptionist in heaven, Casey? Where are you working?
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which,
Good.
I mean, I wish her boss was as perfect at home as he is at work. I don't understand.
Ah,
But anyway, um,
I feed him lots of chocolate and send him
you keep
monkeys,
him
so
medicated.
right, right.
his Dr. Peppers and chocolate.
But I know for me, I had this sort of a hard wake up call in my first marriage to post traumatic stress. So definitely, I look when I see people that are irritable. I mean, we had Emily on one of our very first episodes, and she talked a little bit about this stuff and how it affected her. And I remember because from the change in her and from especially when I went to working part-time and would come in and I'm like, whoa, like this is a big difference. And there's several people that I've worked with that I've seen that happen to. So I think irritability for sure. And then, like you said, the apathy. I mean, you can definitely tell when people are just Dunsky, right? But I also learned that, especially with like the post-traumatic stress, that like your primary functions start to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if I see somebody who's irritable, that's better than when I see somebody like really struggling to do a simple task that they could normally do. So I think those for me, it's like the irritability, the apathy, and then are they struggling to do something that I know they could do? Or
Yeah.
even for myself, because I've been there, like with especially, going through the things that I've gone through, and then the kids. Look, people don't tell you that having children is traumatic as shit. Okay. They need to tell you that it's traumatic.
No one would have them, Anna. No one would have them.
I know. And this is why the birth rate is declining because it's traumatic and nobody tells you.
Yeah.
Like just tell people and then help them. But so I know, and I remember like times when I was at home with two babies or two toddlers, and I'm like, I know how to do this thing, but I can't do it right now.
Right. And that's that accumulated sleep debt. But the other thing that we're hearing more and more about nowadays is adrenal fatigue. And if you go
Mm.
to a holistic doctor, or if you watch enough reels on Facebook or whatever, sooner or later you're going to see some medication, some exercise routine, something that's going to help you with your adrenal fatigue. And what adrenal fatigue is really captures is this notion that when you've kept your stress hormones up long enough, sooner or later, your endocrine system, your glands can't keep up with that demand for those high sustained levels of cortisol and your other stress hormones, and they crash. And adrenal fatigue, what happens when you get in that situation? You have body aches, you lose your appetite. Oftentimes people have unexplained weight loss, nausea, lightheadedness. Um, they'll have brain fog, distractibility, um, low energy, low motivation. I mean, this is a real thing. Now, I will say adrenal fatigue, there's a lot of debate about it, just like there used to be with chronic fatigue syndrome. It's not a recognized medical diagnosis, but it is a set of symptoms that a lot of us, whether it's my sleep deprived parents, like you were describing, Anna, or my folks who've been in sustained fight, flight, or freeze response for whatever reason, by virtue of their work, their personal circumstances, whatever it is, where they find themselves in this brain fog where they lose those abilities you're talking about, and it's almost like you wonder if they're having early onset dementia or if they're having strokes or TIAs, transischemic attacks, some kinds of vascular dementia. But this is a real thing. And when when your autonomic nervous system is out of whack, all this bad shit happens, right? And it's physical, it's real, it's undeniable. And it's our body saying, enough is enough is enough. I cannot do this anymore. And I'm going to stop you. And it stops you.
I want to say, and this may totally not make sense at all, but I want to say that I feel like I used to notice like people would like to stir the pot more, like the shit stirring and the, getting everyone be just being that contagious person. That may not have really been a thing. I don't know. But I just feel like I noticed that more at times with certain people.
And I think that tends to happen, Casey, when people are still in that elevated cortisol state and they almost become addicted to the drama,
Yeah.
to the charge, to the excitement, whether it's the excitement they get from the calls, the work, the performing in this kind of pressure cooker, or in the absence of that, stirring the shit pot, right? And
Yeah.
seeing what they can get going so we can have a little let's see the drama here in the office until the next good call comes along.
Right.
Right. So I think it does make sense. Those people usually can't keep it up though once they, get thrown in the stew
Right.
pot themselves though, do they?
Right. No, not normally.
No, no. Um, and
Yeah,
and that
that makes me think about the social media comments and questions that we got, and people calling it dispatcher cannibalism and the dispatch Hunger Games, bullying, like all of that, because that's a great point. Like if you have that adrenaline junkie, you know, what do they call it in the military where you're always want to go back into the battle? Uh there's a term for that. And people that have post-traumatic stress from combat do that, right? They have to be there. And that's like a great point. If people are not having this adrenaline thing at work, like it's Q word, and well, let me just throw some shit out there so I can see if it sticks to the wall or not.
Well, and then the other hypothesis I need to throw out there is that, people who are sociopathic or narcissistic and don't really give a shit about how other people feel aren't going to suffer um, compassion fatigue because they don't really care about people. They're not going to be brought down by other people's suffering. They're going to still have energy in the bank to fuck with you. Whereas the rest of us who have conscience and compassion and connection and empathy, our energy is being consumed by our job and tending to people and doing a good job and being a good employee and being a good person out in the world. We don't have time to fuck with other people, right? So that's the other hypothesis. Are these just assholes being assholes, who aren't fazed by their job because they don't really care that much? And that's even scarier to think about, because we don't really want to consider we're working with sociopaths or, narcissists, but there's bound to be one in every room.
Oh yeah,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the third hypothesis is, if we're working in an unhealthy organization that's putting all of us at risk for burnout, there's also going to be this notion that if someone's kicking me, I'm going to make sure I have someone to kick. And I'm going to find who that person is, and I'm going to vent my frustrations and insecurities and anger on that person. And I'm going to find a scapegoat. And every group usually finds a scapegoat. That's just group dynamics. So there are lots of ucky reasons why we get the Hunger Games dynamic going on. And why that cannibalism happens. There's also kind of the hazing mentality. I went through it, so if you're going to be a good dispatcher like me, you need to go through it. That bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Which is more toxic organizational culture type stuff. So lots of possibilities.
Now, what would you say for someone, and this was a question that I had, someone wanted me to ask you, back to the loved one's family, that kind of thing. If everyone in the public eye, they're all so intrigued and fascinated with public safety and, what we call quote unquote good calls, which are really the worst calls. People want to hear about that all the time. So what happened with this and that? But a lot of times, when we get home or whatever, we don't want to talk about that stuff. And one, you're not really supposed to, but, how do you make your loved ones or your spouse, whatever, understand that, hey, I don't want to talk about that, and it's not because I'm being a dick or just want to shut down, but I don't want to relive it, basically. But yet they want to know how your day was, like with all the gory details and this and that. And how do you control yourself for not lashing out at the ones that they really don't understand what we do? And I blame TV a lot on this stuff too, because a lot of the shows on TV, that shit's not real. That's not how shit goes down. It's not a perfect ending every time. So like what's your thought on that? Like how to
Well, I rely on my sense of humor a lot for that. I mean, I'll go to parties and people want to ask me about, what do I do about my kid that's on heroin? Let me, can you give me some advice about what to do with my dementing mom? And I'll just kind of make a joke and say, I'm really not that good at my job to begin with. So you don't want to take advice from me, and certainly not here. Or I don't shrink friends and family. That's the other thing. And so, I think it's good for you to have kind of a funny quip to come back with and say, hey, I don't get paid enough on duty to talk about that shit. I'm not going to talk about it when I'm not getting paid for it. Whatever you want to do to bring some levity, but also to say, no. Or, I left that stuff at work. They're still cleaning up that mess. I'll also be vague and kind of talk around it. And sort of say, well, your guess is as good as mine, and play dumb. So if I can't make a good joke about it, I play dumb and say, oh, I didn't hear about that. I was tied up with something else. So for me, little white lies, little humor. And if someone really is like, no, but really, I need your help, I'll say, here's someone that can help you. Here's a referral.
right.
I'm not helping you. This is my off time. And I'll kind of lock it down. But that I tend not to want to have to drop the hammer unless the person
Right.
really doesn't take my first two hints.
Right.
I think that's hard, like in the family setting, if you do have somebody who's curious, because I mean, we all get the same thing at parties, right? Oh, what's the worst call you've ever had, or the funniest call you've ever had? Well, I always say, like, I always will tell people, well, my version of funny and your version of funny, probably not the same thing. So let's not go there. I think that comes back to like having healthy boundaries as just as a human and being able to say no, I'm sorry. Like,
Right.
I
And,
don't want
and
to talk about
keeping
it.
and keeping in mind that once again, as women, the three of us are women, we're trained to be compliant and to give people what they ask for, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going against gender stereotypes by setting those limits. And for those of us that have human giver syndrome, which is kind of a new and emerging concept in the literature, and that's a female thing, where we're kind of trained and expected to be endlessly self-sacrificing and caretaking until the day we fucking die. It may be harder to set those boundaries, but for those of us that really, we have all the friends we need, and if we lose some of them, we're okay with that. It's okay to say not tonight, and maybe not ever. I'm not gonna. I don't want to talk about work. I don't love it that much, or it's just part of it. It's 8 hours of my day. I don't want to give it any more time. I want to talk about something fun. Oh,
Yeah.
it's so hard.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good thing. Like, no, I don't want to talk about that because it sucked. Let's talk about something fun. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate in that my family never really wanted to know what I do, even though I've done some cool and interesting stuff. And a lot of the time, they also knew I couldn't talk about it because it was sensitive or classified work. Um, Now, I will tell you, I've had to travel overseas, and I've come back and had to come clean with my mother. And my brother threw me under the bus. I was actually over in Afghanistan at one point, and she was sick enough at the time that I couldn't tell her where I was. So I came back and I walked in the house, and mothers know, right? And she goes, "So where have you really been?" So I told her I was in St. Louis. And I said, Mom, I was in Afghanistan.
it's
And she
like
goes,
Afghanistan.
yeah, it's East St. Louis is sort of like Afghanistan. So I said, "Oh, Mom, I was in Afghanistan." And she goes, "Well, now you have something to tell your father. And oh, by the way, your brother says it's not the first time you've gone over and done something like this." And I'm like, "Mom." And then I had to call my brother and be like, "Dude, you threw me under the bus." He's like, "Yeah, I figured you were due for it." Um,
Oh
but
man,
but
man.
the bottom line is they all knew, they didn't ask me what I was doing over there. They both cursed me out. Both my mom and my dad cursed me out for having done it. But they never asked for more detail. And that my family was kind of like, don't ask, don't tell, let's not talk about feelings. Let's just talk about, let's play cards and, eat some cake. That's what we're
Yeah.
comfortable doing. And I know that not every family's, some people like to be in other people's business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like that's one of the things growing up military, it's like there was always oh, that's top secret, or there was always boundaries, right? Like I'm
Even
not
if it
telling you
didn't
about.
wasn't really.
Right. Yeah, as kids we always had. So, but I get people don't, not everybody learns that.
And I think the other challenge is that when you work in the jurisdiction where you live, it becomes
Ugh,
really hard because,
yeah.
people just are curious and want to know, sometimes for good intentions, sometimes just because they're nosy and don't have anything else to think about.
Mhm.
But it is hard. I feel for people that live and work in the same place.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that, by the way.
Me either. Me either.
Mm-mm.
How can a dispatcher establish a healthy work-life balance when the job can be so emotionally demanding?
recently listened to a podcast with Brene Brown with some researchers that were talking about the stress response. And I love the fact that they gave the advice that in order to kind of achieve a sense of closure around a stressful event, there are some really practical things you can do to tell your body that you no longer have to be in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And I really like this notion because they're real simple. And they said the way you can kind of remind your body that that stressful event is over and that you're safe and that it's all good and you can let your guard down and your cortisol and your adrenaline can kind of trickle down to normal levels is number one, engage in movement, something that's pleasant. So go for a walk, take a dance class, dance it out in your house, play pickleball, whatever it is, but move. The other is breathe. Be aware of your breathing and make sure you're not holding your breath or that you're still kind of breathing shallow as if you're in that fight or flight mode. Connect with people that you love and enjoy, whether it's a coworker, friend. People with fur also count as people to me. So your pets. The other thing is to be mindful, to tune in with yourself, check in with your body, check in with your emotions, check in with your thoughts, and kind of get back to the present moment. Okay, get out of that survival mode, get out of the numb mode. Just really be mindful and engaged in the present moment. And in the last step is get some quality sleep. And I think, if we were to do those 5 things on a regular basis, it's just good health, right? But, in terms of really letting your body know it's okay to let your guard down. We're safe. Nothing's chasing us. Nothing's threatening us. It's all good. And we've been successful, effective, and competent in meeting the challenge and overcoming it. So I think that is probably a really good place to end.
Wait a minute. Not until we get our rapid fire questions answered this time. Dr. Meredith, texting or talking? Which do you prefer?
hate to admit it, texting.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
If you had a superpower, invisibility or super strength?
Super strength.
One thing you can't live without?
Cheese or dogs?
Cheese. I love it. All right. One book or piece of literature you think everyone should read or listen to?
The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown.
I don't even think I've heard of that one. I'm gonna write it down though.
I just did.
I know some of her stuff, but I don't think I've heard of that one. So, all right. And if there was a message you could spread to the world, what would it be?
Be more curious and less judgmental.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And with your core beliefs, right? Just be curious about them. Don't judge them. Oh.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much again.
Yes,
well,
thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys for having me back. You know where to find me. I'm always on call. I am your doc on call.
Thank you to Dr. Meredith for joining us again and again for some great episodes. This week, we have got to shout out to all of the first responders in the Baltimore, Anne Arundel County areas that dealt with a bridge collapse this week. Amazing work. Keep it up. You guys are the best.
Calm Week is coming up in a few weeks, guys. We are going to have our first giveaway coming up. We will have details on that next week, so stay tuned for that. And until next time, y'all, bye.
Bye.
I hope that everyone is constantly assessing when they have that fuck it moment. Is this a healthy fuck it or is this an unhealthy fuck it? And what do I need to do about it?